Much for joining us on War and Pandemic: Descent into Hell.
Yeah, Steve, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate your last guest talking about the Chinese house Christians. You know, I haven't really told the story publicly much, but I actually met my wife doing translation work for house Christians. We used to go to a Bible study here in the D.C. area, and obviously I don't want to give out too many details, but we would translate what the pastor was saying over the internet video, and be able to get it to people back in parts of China doing those house Christian work. And so my wife and I were both taking turns translating.
Tell us a little bit about that, because what the Chinese Communist Party, from the days of the emperor, the Taiping Rebellion, I'll get into more of this next week, it was an ersatz version of Christianity, so it's not what it ended up being, but it started with the missionaries in the Bible movement in Canton. That became bigger, 100 times bigger than our Civil War. The Taiping Rebellion is one of the reasons that the central authority is always petrified, even more than the Catholic Church. They're particularly petrified about evangelical Christianity. It puts that they believe that that's something that can, in the dry match of the way the atheists have taken out all God out of the culture, that tinder can catch on fire and start a prairie fire that they can't control. So one of the things they really try to suppress, just like the Roman Empire did, is the underground Christian church. The evangelical Christians are a particular target. Can you explain to us what the life is for a Christian in China?
Well, the life for a Christian in China, if you are trying to actually study the Bible, if you're actually trying to follow Christianity in terms of orthodoxy, in terms of doctrine, and you're not willing to go to those sort of approved official churches in China, it's very repressive. You're either meeting in homes that move around on a regular basis. One week you're in someone's house, the next week you're in someone else's house. Because remember, the Chinese Communist Party, they don't just employ this social surveillance in terms of digital processes that exist. They've had surveillance going back since the start of the party. What they do is they include community watchers, neighborhood watchers. Every building you live in, every dormitory has at least one person who's a member of the party or on the party payroll, and their job is to keep track of the daily lives of every single person in that area. I mean, this is down to your very apartment building will have somebody watching you from the party. And of course, every work center, every school, every classroom in some cases, especially if they think one of the professors is starting to go off the reservation or if the students are getting a little uppity. So they're keeping a very close eye on who's meeting, when they're meeting, why they're meeting, what they're up to, even to the level of who's marrying who, what sort of traditions people are following. This is all kept track of on a very regular basis, on a very personal, intimate basis. The intimate details of your personal life are known to the party and are kept in party ledgers at the small level. And the Chinese people know this. So to be a house Christian and to take part in one of these organizations is, I mean, it's incredibly dangerous. It's almost like it is actually like being part of a resistance movement within China. And it really speaks to the faith of these people, to their level of belief that they'd be willing to risk life and limb of being thrown into one of the black prisons that's not on the books, of being disappeared. They'll sometimes meet outside on the outskirts of the cities. That's Cardinal Zen is, of course, famous for that. And this is the life of an everyday underground Christian, house Christian, but we're now seeing, and it's hard to, kind of wrap your arms around what the actual total of this is, but we've seen numbers 30 million, 40 million, 50 million, and growing of Christians in China that are operating and getting the faith and building up. And their point is, they're not there to necessarily challenge the party, but the party used them as a challenge because, and as I think you stated again and again, they view any authority that's over them as a challenge to their authority.
We're pressed for time, but some of the things I really want to get into, this thing about the dark prisons and also the suppression of the migrant workers. There's no voice for the little guy in China, right? There's no, and the Western media does a terrible job of covering this. Talk about just the daily oppressions of the people. This is the Chinese Communist Party runs as basically a glorified slave labor camp. Can you walk people through that?
Well, that's absolutely right. And to the point of where, since China initially instituted the People's Republic back in 1949, If you are thrown into prison, you are immediately put into forced labor. Whether you're men in one of the men's camps, one of the women's camps, you're immediately put into forced labor. We've seen so many indications of this going into the supply chain of the use of prison labor throughout this. Then we've also seen, of course, with the Falun Gong and now with the Uyghurs, forced organ donation, organ harvesting, essentially is what it is. And the Chinese government has essentially admitted that they're doing this, if they claim it's only for prisoners who have died or have been executed. But doctors have come out, whistleblowers that have gotten out, that have been defected, have said, look, we're going to do these donations, and we can tell these patients are still alive. They're just completely emaciated. They've been starved. We don't even know where they've been. We can't keep a track of them. And this all goes back to China using these systems, these tools, as means of repression of the people. They want these stories to get out because they know that it will keep the old 100 names, the Lao Baixing, it will keep them in line, that if you run afoul of the party. This is also the same reason that when Xi instituted his cult of personality, he immediately launched what he called the anti-corruption campaign. It wasn't an anti-corruption campaign. It was a party purge of anyone who was seen as disloyal to Xi or as a potential rival. They were sacked, they were shut down, and the newspaper headlines, not just in Global Times, but all across China, were posted up in community parks, at bus stations. Everybody knew when someone was taken down and who did it.
Jack, we got to bounce. How do people get more access to your writings and to follow you? What's your Twitter handle, and how do people get access to you?
Twitter handle is Jack Posobeic, JackPosobiec, and best place to find me is OneAmericanNewsOANN.com.